Good day, everybody. Welcome to this session. So we will be looking at a use case for migrating from SG to XG. By ways of introduction, I'm Lucas Pelser. I work in the South African region. I'm a pre-sales engineer in this side of the world. I've been chosen to do this session because we have successfully migrated quite a large number of customers from SG to XG, and I have quite a nice use case to share with you and what you should be looking out for, and how should you prepare your partners and customers to migrate from SG to XG. So SG has been a long-running product for Sophos. We've been having it for quite a while, and there's a lot of customers that love the product, and to convince them is just one of the parts to move from the SG to the XG appliance. And but technically it's very possible, and it's not that much of a daunting task. We're going to show you some couple of interesting things to look out for in this session. So yeah, without further ado, I'll move on to this session, and you will see the migration story here is basically the background of the story. It's a government customer that's been using SG for more than 2 years, and they have 1,000 user plus environment. So we needed to actually move them. First of all, we had to convince them to actually purchase the XG, and they've done so, and then we had to actually then start a migration plan. So we first made a backup of the SG, and we to see a complete overview of the policies. We actually, if for the partners out there that doesn't know, we do have a migration tool that we can run. So we can run you make a backup of the SGs. I'm sure it has been covered in the previous sessions, but we've made a backup of the SG. We run it through the migration tool. The migration tool is a virtual machine that we run, and we convert the config to an XG in a backup format. So what I mean by that is you restore the backup this backup file to the XG, and you should have a complete migration from SG to XG. There's a couple of caveats around this, so we'll talk about them a little bit later, but the migration tool is a nice way to start. I found that is the easiest way, especially if you don't want to start from scratch. There's also some customers that do want to start from scratch, which is not entirely a bad idea for various of reasons. So you can actually start from scratch with the XG. You just have to make sure you make nice config screenshots of what the SG looks like, and then you can actually build the XG from scratch in a more simple SG deployment cases, but that's not always the case. So after the migration tool was run, the migration tool will actually tell you what cannot be migrated, and what is what is the flaws, or what is the objects that's a problem, and it will actually give you a report in terms of what objects won't be restored to the XG format, and what objects are not supported. And then we restored the backup to an offline XG. So we didn't just put the XG in line, we actually put it on a table, and we ran the restore of the SGs after the migration tool to the XG to see what it looks like. And then we scheduled a change window. So it wasn't all that easy, to be honest. So the change window we had was only half an hour at a time. So that's a really short change window to change a firewall, because you can imagine as a firewall is a key component of this customer, the change windows that we had is very, very minute, and we also had to actually do it obviously after hours. And so the change window was approved for us, and then we installed the XG in the change window time frame we had. So what was key? The key was preparation. Obviously, we had to prepare properly. We had to log on to the actual SG and make sure we've got all the config ready. There's a lot of nitty and gritty things you can forget about, like site-to-site VPNs. One of the things that caught us basically was also the fact that you had to they had a hotspot portal on the SG. So those things are some things to look at, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. We obviously inform partners about the migration tool, that it is a migration tool to make your life easier, so that you can know that there is something out there, and then understand the limitations. What I mean by that is that the SG does have some features that is not available in XG as such, but most of it is. But if there is limitations, just make sure you understand what those are. And then what we had to do is that we had to look at what objects are not being migrated. Just some examples of that was the Wi-Fi hotspots portal, for example. Certificates is obvious because certificates cannot be exported and migrated. You'd have to recreate this or regenerate certificates. And then we had certain DNATs, like for Outlook Web Access. That was quite a big one for us. Outlook Web Access have a very special way of being published via DNATs, and that the migration tool didn't migrate. And like I said before, site-to-site VPNs. Another thing within the preparation that was key for this customer and partner was to ignore inactive objects. So there was a lot of routes and policies that was created in the SG because normally these SGs has been in environments for many years. So this SG has been floating in this environment for more than 3 years, and there was a lot of objects that was created and no firewall cleanup was done. So a lot of these objects weren't being used, a lot of the routes actually weren't being used, and there was also some policies that was created was never used. So just identify those, look which ones are being used, what traffic is flowing through them, and that will make your task a lot easier. You'll find half of the things you don't actually have to migrate because they're not in use at the moment. Some of the issues we encountered while migrating this customer was device access was not configured. So the first time we actually installed the XG, all the device access tabs were disabled, so we couldn't actually log on to the firewall from externally. This caused some issues at the night of the migration because I had to remotely assist, and we couldn't get remote access to it, and it took a while to figure out that the migration tool didn't obviously adopt this. We'd have to enable device access on the XG, and this works differently from the XG than the SG. We also had issues where the ARP table of the ISP router wasn't updating. What do I mean by this is literally the ISP router would keep the old MAC address of the SG active for their ARP timeout was very high. So it was set to something like 2 hours. So in 2 hours, we couldn't access the device from outside. So we reckoned there was something wrong with the XG, or there was an interface problem, only to find out that the interface didn't update on the ISP router. So that's not really related to an XG to XG migration, but it is one of the things that can hinder the migration process, which it did for us. And then the wireless APs, they needed to be approved. So obviously, if you have this SG used to be a wireless controller as well. So as you can see, it was quite a complex environment. So the XG also has that ability, but all the APs will pop up into the XG's Pro portfolio, but you'd have to approve those because the XG has never seen those APs. They were enrolled on the SG device. The hotspot portal settings didn't migrate, so the hotspot portal didn't look exactly the same, or there wasn't actually a hotspot portal, so they have a guest portal that didn't migrate. The Exchange Outlook Web Access didn't work because we had to create a new DNAT for those, and then also the aliases APs wasn't propagated with the migration tool. So what is this? So they have an ISP, the specific customer, that gives them 5 public IPs, and we create them as aliases on the XGs and similar to the SG for that matter. But these public IPs weren't propagated properly with the migration tool, so we had to go and specify the aliases. It was only 5 IP addresses, but we needed to realize that we have to do that. And then there's also things like passwords and security keys, like the wireless SSID pre-shared key. That didn't propagate, obviously, because that is a secure mechanism. So we had to find out what was the previous wireless SSID key, pre-shared key, so we didn't have to go and change every machine. So wireless settings. And then some of the issues that we encountered continued. They have REDs, so they have the Sophos Red Ethernet devices. So these are the remote Ethernet devices that we use, and the deployment of those, their branches was connected with these REDs. So the REDs obviously have an unlock code, if those who don't know, and we had to reintroduce those RED appliances to the XG with the unlock codes. Those unlock codes you get in an email, or you'd have to ask one of the sales engineers to give you the unlock code for those REDs. So just be aware that if you have REDs in the SG environment, just be aware they won't automatically start working on the XG. You would have to enroll those. So that's one of the problems we encountered. Then another thing we saw is that the user certificates needed to be deleted so they can be regenerated. So what I mean by this is they had VPN policy, so the users would VPN into the actual site. And what happened here is that if a user wanted to VPN in, it will give them a certificate error because they didn't have to actually, they didn't reinstall the client. And all we had to do here is that the users was propagated via the migration tool, and we had to actually delete all the old certificates so that the XG can reissue a VPN certificate for the user for it to work. We'd also had to obviously reissue the VPN clients for the users. So the users that were using VPN clients, we had to actually regenerate those. We reinstalled that VPN client. That could be quite a daunting task, but with version 18 on the XG, there is quite a few ways to automate this installation via the actual the portal, so the user portal. The users can log on to the user portal and download their new SSL VPN client and settings, and that resolved that issue. So that was something that was one of the biggest tasks to do, but it's something to watch out for when you do migrate from SG to XG. Then the site-to-site VPNs needed to be recreated. The only issue here was that actually site-to-site VPNs, as you know, most of us are using pre-shared keys there, sometimes certificates. But if you are using pre-shared keys, those pre-shared keys weren't migrated, so you'd have to go to a site-to-site VPN, say from Sophos to Cisco ASA. You would have to find out that what that pre-shared key was to regenerate that site-to-site VPN. And then from the DNATs point of view, just pay attention. What I did is I made a list of the DNATs on the device, and I actually tested them from external to see which ones were working and which ones weren't working. And just a little sample file of what I did, and I could actually establish what DNATs are being used and which ones are not, because I was migrating DNATs that actually wasn't needed or wasn't used anymore. So it's best to test these while the SG is still online. Go through the config and test these DNATs to see if there is any issues, or which ones are working, which ones do you have to migrate, and which ones are not working. Because if you do migrate them, and you don't know which ones were in use and which ones were not, there could be underlying issues, and you'll be struggling with something that has never worked or hasn't even worked on the SG, and the migration tool actually migrated it. So some of the lessons learned when we moved this customer is preparation is key. Obviously, we had to prepare ourselves properly. We had to make sure that we have everything in place. We've learned quite a lesson with this. Like I said, we did one or two change control windows because of the first time we had the ARP issue with the ISP. We had the alias IPs that weren't migrated properly. So that was one of the issues that made the change window fail in just half an hour. Obviously, it's very short. And that all migrations are the same. So, but I'm saying by this is that if you do migrate from SG to XG, some people will have RAIDs, some will have site-to-site VPNs, but some not. So if the migration tool works really well, if there's no things like hotspot, wireless hotspot zones, or if there's no site-to-site VPNs, then it's all good. So that could make your migration a lot easier. So this one was a lot more complex. Also then set expectations, so from our point of view, the customer, he assumed that if you plug the XG in, everything will work. It was a trial and error type of thing. We can't just plug in a new firewall and expect everything to work straight off the bat. We had to, this customer was very pressurized in terms of their Outlook web access. They wanted their emails to work 24/7. So even though we did the change 12 o'clock at night, we still had some of their clients phoning or some of their end users phoning us saying they can't access their email, and they were putting pressure on us to get the DNATs working. So set expectations of a change window. Don't just take a half an hour window. Set yourself an hour or 2 hours for the change window so that you can properly prepare and install the XG and make changes as you need to know. So know the environment and prepared properly. And then allow for a few change controls. You might not have a successful change the first time around like we did. Be prepared to roll back. So what I'm saying by that is just leave the XG as is. To roll back is a pretty easy process. You just plug the SG back in and just leave it the way it was. So we didn't change anything on the SG. If we needed to roll back, we would just plug the SG back in and everything will be back online like it was. And then, like I said before, allow for long enough change control windows. And so the actual firewalls obviously is it's a crucial part to a business. So you will get a short change window. So prepare well for your move to this. Then some advice I could give you is document everything, screenshot sample. I will show you something that I did for this customer. So if you want to actually go ahead and maybe just take screenshots of the SG deployments, I think that really helped me because the problem with this is we didn't want to change anything on the SG. We didn't want to actually make any changes on the SG so that we can access it afterwards, because if the change would fail, we'd have to plug the SG back in, and therefore we didn't want to change the IP address of the internal network to reference back to it. So once the change was successful, we actually changed the IP address of the SG so that we can use it offline and log on to it because most of these customers that move from SG to XG is they're probably gonna, the SG is probably end of life for them, so they're gonna trash it or get rid of it. So they can actually then give you access to the old appliance if you need to go reference something back. So just change the IP addresses and make it available offline to yourself so that you can go back and reference something on that SG. So if you come down 2 weeks down the line and a customer says to you, I cannot connect to this DNAT because this used to work 2 weeks ago and now it doesn't, you can actually go and log on to the SG to reference something back. Understand the environment really well. I've asked for many network diagrams. I've asked for where the users sit, what branches do they have, what are their IP address ranges. So it does help if the customer can give you some info onto their network, into the environment. We were shooting a bit in the dark with our this specific use case. We had to go and find where the Exchange server is sitting because the customer didn't know himself. And a lot of the use cases, unfortunately, will be like that. So it's a trial and error. Try and find out where the Exchange server is. But most of the information you can actually get from the SG's config. So that really helped me a lot with this use case. And then make sure the customer is not using a feature that XG cannot provide. So this is one thing, like for example, sport scan blocks. It's a feature that's not available on XG as yet. It will come out soon. But look at these, and if the expectation was that if there's very technical people at the customer and they were using this feature, they're going to complain that you actually moved them to XG. So just make sure that all the features they do require is already on XG. In version 18, most of it is there, but there's still small things like the sport scans that can cause you issues. And then focus on the advantages of the XG's features that it provides behind the SG. So what I'm saying by this is if the customer gets deterred and he doesn't want the XG anymore because it's too much of a change problem, focus on the benefits they can get with XG, like the performance and ease of use and reporting and so forth. So and development around XG and that it's Sophos' flagship and so on. So focus on the actual product and what it can provide to the customer if it does install. We got a lot of kickback with this use case specifically, where the customer said I should have just stayed with SG because of the technicalities behind it, but partially it is the customers also didn't know the environment too well. So just focus on what is best for the customer. And then the other key thing I could say is persistence. Just keep on going, keep on convincing the customer that XG is the best way to go, and keep on trying for change control windows till you succeed in doing this. Then thank you for your time. What I will do now is I'll just quickly show you the sample document that I've made when I moved to this customer. So I'm just going to browse through it quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but what I've done is I really took a screenshot of all their policies that they have, all their DNATs, and maybe even their forward rules, firewall rules. I created myself a little DNAT policies here, what is working and what is not working to reference back websites websites they are hosting, like these ones. I've made screenshots of what their Wi-Fi networks looks like. What do they have? Do they have hotspots? Do they have internal networks? And then their hotspot. This was a big thing. They wanted their logo back, and they wanted it to look exactly like that. So I needed to do that. And then their web server protection portfolios. Those are DNATs. I also made screenshots of those. And like I said, this really assisted me, this document, the rates for their branches. I made a screenshot of what rates they have with what branches and what config. Site-to-site VPNs I made screenshots of. I took this out of the XG's config file, the SG's config file, where what their Wi-Fi networks looks like. And this really helped me when I had to reference back. Once I've installed it, I could actually go and look in this document what is missing, or if the customer asked me what is wrong, we could look together with the partners, we could actually look at what settings have we maybe missed out on. So if it's helpful to make a document like this, you can see it's not too much work. It wasn't too much effort for me to do. This one is specifically 22 pages, but it really helps me even if the customer comes back now and say, I don't know why this doesn't work. It actually assisted me in the migration. Anyways, I think that is it. Don't be deterred about moving from SG to XG. Like I said, this was quite a useful success case here. We successfully migrated within 3 half an hour change windows. The third attempt, we got it right. And so just keep on looking at these use cases and think of how to migrate customers from SG to XG in terms of it can be done. Technically, it's very possible, and it's not that complicated. Thank you for your time, and thank you for watching this session.